All right, perfect. So welcome everybody. Today we're going to look over some planting tips just for tomatoes and other. Oh, sorry, Renee is joining. Let's let Renee in. All right, so today we're going to look over some planting tips for tomatoes and other common garden vegetables that we see in Ontario. For a friend down in North Carolina, maybe some of the climate related information might not be as relevant, but you are a master gardener, so I feel like you already have some pretty capable gardening hands. So just as a quick rundown of how this presentation is going to go, we'll just quickly introduce our company, Nurture Growth, so you know who we are, because I'm sure most of you haven't heard of us. We're a pretty small organic fertilizer company. And if you have any questions, by all means, leave them in the chat, and I'll do my best to address all of them at the end of the presentation. And also, for everyone who's attending right now, you will be receiving a link to a copy of the webinar shortly after the presentation. Additionally, I mentioned this earlier, but if you have any suggestions on how I can improve this presentation, by all means, like my contact information is at the end of the presentation. You'll have that handy. You can let me know how good or how bad I did. Usually the ones that say how bad I did are a little more useful, ironically. Sorry, someone else just hit puberty again, joining. Beautiful. All right, so yeah, if you didn't learn anything today, please let me know, and then we'll work to improve on the next one. So with that being said, let's get this train rolling. All right, so what is or who is Nurture Growth Bio? So we're a Canadian biotech, or actually, I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me introduce myself real quick. So my name's Eric. I've been with Nurture Growth for about 2 years now, 2 years coming up in July. I'm a U of T grad with a degree in environmental science. I used to be a landscaper, then I worked in the green roof industry, did a lot of research on urban agriculture, and somehow wound up in agriculture. So who is Nurture Growth Bio? So we're a Canadian biotech company. We're trying to run a circular economy project, essentially. We'll get into that a little bit later. So we have a strong focus on safe and sustainable and safe garden inputs. We also work with farmers too. We're trying to put out an affordable alternative to chemicals. We're working on some innovative organic products. Like we already have our flagship biofertilizer. We're working on releasing a biopesticide for 2022, and also a biofungicide. And one of our main goals as a company is to always be trying to do our part for climate change by rescuing and upcycling food waste. But there's one more slide about that kind of at the end of the presentation. But let's jump right into veggie stuff. So vegetable planting considerations. So we want to be mindful of the space that you want to grow your vegetables in. Some vegetables are going to need a lot of space to grow, while others might just fit neatly into a container. Like for instance, tomatoes are kind of a good hybrid of both. Sorry, I'm just going to let this person in. Here's my mouse. All right, so yeah, tomatoes are a great example of both because they can fit into containers and no issue, or you can put it in your garden. You want to choose the right location for your plants. Similar to having preferences for space, different plants are going to need different amounts of light, right? You want to, or if possible, determine your soil characteristics. So like, unless you're a really hardcore gardener, or if you're a master gardener like the one we have in our audience tonight, so unless you're a hardcore gardener looking to profit from your harvest, you're likely not going to want to spend money on a soil test, and I don't blame you. I usually just do one simple test just to determine sort of like what type of soil I'm growing in, just a squeeze test. So take a handful of soil, put it in your hand, squeeze it. If you poke it and it crumbles right apart, or if it doesn't form any sort of ball, you have really sandy soil. If you make a ball with it, poke it, and really there's no constitutional change to your ball, you likely have very clay heavy soils. And if you make a ball with your soil, poke it, and sort of you can feel a little bit of give there, you have loamy soil, which generally is the ideal type. Also, you can just Google the squeeze test. There's a couple other like DIY garden tests you can do just to determine what kind of soil you have. And last but not least, always have your bottle of Nurture Growth biofertilizer ready when you're going into the garden. But why don't we start taking a look at tomatoes? So tomatoes, pretty much considered to be the most widely grown vegetable in Ontario, or at home in Ontario. Like I think all my neighbors are growing tomatoes this year. Very anecdotal evidence, but I've always been around tomatoes growing up, and I find pretty lucky. So there's a couple different varieties of tomatoes. You can find them in bush or vining varieties. And tomatoes are pretty versatile, where you can grow them in garden beds, or if you just have a balcony or something. I used to live in a condo, now I'm back in a house. You can grow it on a pot in your balcony. What else? And also, interestingly enough, tomatoes used to just be grown for aesthetics, like up until like late 19th century, early 20th century, when it started to be produced commercially. So it's still kind of a young crop to humanity. All right, so planting tomatoes. So like as with most fruits and vegetables, you can start tomatoes from seed or with starters from a nursery, which depending on how much work you want to put into it, right? So if you're starting from seed, I like to take an egg carton, fill each pot of the carton with enough soil to fill most of the pot, and then place the seed right in the middle of each pot. You can use a finger to press down each seed just so they have sufficient contact with the soil. And then afterwards, like after I flip the lid of the egg carton, I generally take just a sheet of saran wrap or plastic, whatever I have handy, and just put it on top of the carton just so I can conserve a bit of the moisture. And you want to store that the egg carton, that the germination station, as I like to call it. You want to store that carton in a dark room, probably around, or just room temperature is fine. It shouldn't be any lower than 25 or 20 degrees Celsius. 25 degrees Celsius is the optimal range, or 70 to 80 degrees Fahrenheit. And your tomatoes will generally start spreading about 1 to 2 weeks after being planted in the carton. So after your tomatoes start germinating, you're going to want to harden them off just before you introduce them outside. And you want to be germinating your seeds about like 4 weeks before the last frost date. That's generally been my go-to. So you want to, like I said, prepare to harden off your tomato seedlings for outdoor conditions. So this means slowly introducing them to the elements that they're going to find outside. If you place them like outside for a few hours a day, like generally I try and spread this out over like a 5-day period. On the first day, I'll do like an hour of sunlight and then beef it up the next day and just have incremental increases. You want to do that for about a week, but also keep them protected from wind, like direct sun, and bring them inside when the temperatures start to dip below like 10 degrees Celsius. And I do this, about either like 5 to 10 days is generally what I do, or 10 is probably preferable. So about 2 weeks after the last frost date, you're going to want to check your farmer's almanac or whatever your local gardening source is if you don't know your hardness zone. So you want to be planting about 2 weeks after the last frost date. Like at this point, you're pretty safe to be planting your tomatoes either in garden or containers. You want to dig, or when you're planting, you just want to make sure that at least the roots are completely covered when you plant it in the garden. The depth might vary, generally a couple inches at the most, because you're still just planting small seedlings at this point. And also just a small tip before you plant. We found that nurture growth is awfully good at encouraging root growth right off the bat. We have some pretty beneficial microbes in our fertilizer that really improve root growth, especially with young seedlings. So you got some nurture growth, by all means, this is the time to start using it. All right. So care and harvest. So tomatoes are big fans of sunlight. So there's an old adage with tomatoes that tomatoes have fun in the sun, but they fade in the shade. That's a little rhyme I like. So the more sunlight, the better with tomatoes, honestly. Regular watering is important. Like tomatoes are going to be like pretty heavy feeders, especially if you're growing tomatoes with like really big fruits coming off it. They like warm weather, kind of mild levels of humidity. I mean, not like we can control that outside, but if that's kind of what your climate is offering, perfect. In Ontario, that's pretty much what we're going to get all the time. And if you're in a city, it's going to be even more humid. So fertilizing. So once you're, pardon me, it's gonna have another person coming to hang out. Excuse me. So yeah, you want to apply fertilizer right at planting. And generally, like every 2 weeks is the interval I use, especially with nurture growth. That's the perfect interval. It's just about every 2 weeks up until harvest, honestly. And so harvesting, tomatoes are ready to be harvested when they're bright red in color. Like that's kind of irrespective of the size, or at least the color is like a deep color of the variety that you picked. It might not always be red. I'm colorblind, so that makes it tough for me. And also, after you harvest your tomatoes, don't place unripe tomatoes on a sunny window because they'll rot. Also, don't store your tomatoes in a fridge. I see a lot of people doing that, but it actually speeds up decomposition. All right, so there's a couple problems you can face when you're growing tomatoes. Blossom end rot is calcium deficiency, and generally that is because of fluctuations in moisture. I find mulching is going to be your best friend when you want to conserve water and mitigate soil moisture loss. Especially since tomatoes thrive in like really sunny areas of the garden. The soil moisture might fluctuate quite rapidly, especially if your watering schedule is a little off kilter. So you also have early or late blight, fungal disease. So that's a result of kind of poor weather, like if it's going to rain a lot. Easy way to try and mitigate this as much as possible is just try and get rid of the infected leaves if possible, and also do not compost those leaves, because you might just put the blight in your compost pile. Fusarium wilt, it's another fungal disease, causes yellowing and wilting of the plant. We got cracking from extreme weather conditions or like uneven moisture, uneven watering even. And this one I threw in not to scare anyone, but just because it's becoming a little more prevalent, the Mosaic Virus. So it causes distorted leaves and causes new growth to be narrow and twisted, like kind of a gnarly looking thing. The leaves start to become yellow, mottled, and there's like a mosaic of like dark green spots that show up on the leaf. Aphids are an insect vector for them. And ultimately, once your plant has it, burn the plant to get it out of your garden as soon as possible. You can't treat a plant once it's infected with Mosaic virus, and you certainly don't want it to transmit to any other plants in your garden. All right. Kale, moving right along. The whole presentation wasn't just about tomatoes. We're going to go over about 4 or 5 different veggies here. So kale, another popular one in Canada. It's been rising in popularity in the last 10 years. I'd like to say. Kale is vigorous, nutritious. It's cold hardy, easy to harvest and prepare. So it's available in multiple varieties. Curly kale is quite common. You also get red wart kale for the darker colored stuff, and Scotch kale is pretty popular as well. Similar to lettuce, kale is something you can continuously harvest. So generally you want to harvest from the outside in and leave the center of the plant just so it can keep growing. So planting tips. So they grow well in, kale grows well in larger spaces and raised garden beds specifically. Just so long as the leaves have space to grow out. Yeah, you want them to be able to spread and collect as much sunlight as possible. Kale prefers well-drained soil and plenty of space between other plants. When you're planting kale seeds, basically in your garden rows, you want to kind of make a small row, like use your finger and just kind of make a divot almost about 1/4 inch to a 1/2 inch deep in well-drained and light soil, and then just kind of sprinkle your seedlings in. You'll probably get kale seeds in a little seed dispenser, or if you have a seed dispenser, by all means, chuck them in there. And you want to plant like a nice steady row. And then eventually, once the seedlings start to grow a little bit, you want to thin them out. That's my scissor hand motion there, sorry. You want to thin them out till they're about 8 to 12 inches apart. And if you're transplanting kale instead of direct sowing, you're going to want to plant the roots, or you'll probably have it growing in a root ball. So you just want to make sure that, like, when you're planting the root ball down, that it's even with your soil level. You don't need to put it too much deeper. Just on par with the soil horizon is mint. All right, and also you want to space them out about 18 inches apart if you're doing transplants, just because they'll be a little bit bigger. Moving right along. All right, so Kale Care. So kale, or with kale, I'd say about 6 hours of sun is the minimum amount of sunlight you want to give to your kale. If planting like late summer for a fall crop, by all means, plant in an area with lots of sun. If you're planting in the spring for a summer crop, you want to plant your kale in kind of a partially shaded area, so you can still get the 6 hours of sun, but you're not going to overdo it with the sunlight. You want to water regularly just to maintain crisp leaves. And kale is a thirsty plant as well. Kale also prefers like sort of mild temperatures, not too hot, not too cold. So about 60 degrees to 70 degrees Fahrenheit, or for Canadians here, 16 to 21 degrees Celsius. Excuse me. As with tomatoes, as with every plant, we always recommend applying nurture growth biofertilizer as you plant, just to really boost that microbial population right on the root zone and get the roots established more quickly. The bigger the roots are when they're young, the bigger the plant's going to grow. And so with weeding, I always recommend mulching, honestly. Water conservation, and it conserves more water and it keeps the weeds away. Or at least it does a better job of keeping the weeds away than bare soil does. So harvesting kale, so it's generally time to harvest when, I mean, I don't know how big your guys' hands are, but mine's about the same size as a small book. So that's generally when I would harvest kale, when it's about the size of my palm. If you see any damaged or yellow leaves, you want to tear those away first or cut them away, whatever works. And then you also want to start your harvest with the oldest leaves on the plant. And generally, you're going to be working your way outside in. Like, you don't want to start by picking the center of the plant, because that's actually what helps continue the plant growth. So yeah, work outside in, and then similar to lettuce, you can continue harvesting as you need it. So there are a couple pests that you'll see on kale. So I meant to say kale is prone to pests that riddle the cabbage family. It's in the same family. The common ones to watch out for are slugs, aphids, and cabbage worm. So you're going to see slugs when it rains, and they're going to start eating your kale leaves. Hand pick them, move them to another part of the garden, get rid of them. Butterflies and cabbage moths are going to lay eggs, or they can lay eggs on the leaves. Neem oil can be kind of effective, honestly. Spray some nurture growth on the leaves, and the microbes in our fertilizer, they'll help outcompete, or at least make that leaf almost uninhabitable for pathogens or for pests like that. And aphids are another common one. I mean, you're probably going to see aphids are another common pest. You're probably going to see aphids on most of your plants, and then also cabbage worms. So you know what? Let's keep moving right along. All right, peppers. So very similar plant to tomatoes almost. So they're a member of the nightshade family, similar to tomatoes, and you can get them in sweet or hot varieties. I mean, obviously, y'all have seen different types of peppers in the grocery store. They come in a whole variety of colors. You can grow them indoors or outdoors, just as long as they get enough sunlight. So planting peppers. So they grow really well in containers, and also garden beds. So if you're planting seeds, or if you're planting seeds indoors to eventually harden off, you want to plant them about 10 weeks before you want to transplant them outdoors. The seedlings, seedlings, they got to be planted about an inch deep in warm soil when you're ready to transfer them or transplant them. Same with every plant here on the list today. We recommend that you fertilize right at time of planting, get that root zone going. You really want to beef up the root development of the plant. Sometimes it's beneficial to pinch off early shoots that you see, just to encourage or sort of train your plant to grow the way that you want it to. Some varieties of peppers are probably going to need stakes or trellising just to help support them, and it helps them put more energy into producing better fruit than trying to stand upright. And generally, like, peppers are going to grow kind of similar to tomatoes. I mean, the plants look similar, right? So peppers, they need a lot of sunlight. Let's go ahead and say that. Honestly, the more sunlight, the better. When you water peppers, deeply water them about like 1 to 2 inches every week. But don't water again until you notice that the soil's starting to dry out. It's going to be the key there. So peppers are going to grow almost better in the summer, right? You want warm temperatures to really boost that growth. And as always, fertilize every 2 weeks with nurture growth if that's the one that you're going to use. And we'll get into application rates and stuff a bit later. All right, so harvesting. So depending on what color of pepper that you're growing, you can wait until the pepper has matured to have a deep version of that color. Like say we're doing red peppers, wait until it's a deep red. You can harvest them when they're not as ripe as well if you want, if that's your preference. Mature peppers are going to have a higher vitamin C content. Also, we grow peppers or back when we were still going to the office, we grew like Vietnamese tearjerker peppers. And I'd always catch people pull picking them. Like they just pull the fruit right off. Please get a pair of shears, make sure they're clean shears, and just cut the peppers off the plant. No need to damage the plant like that by pulling it. Yeah, you can harvest the peppers as they're ready to come off. You don't have to do it all in one go. So what kind of problems do you run into with peppers? So cutworms are sort of common. They generally will attack like the base of the plant, like pretty much, or where the stem meets soil. That's where you're going to notice cutworms. You can even see them about an inch or two deep in your soil. It's going to admit, sorry, we have another guest here. I'm just going to let him in. I can't even see my mouse. All right, never mind. So yeah, cutworms, please check your local garden center if you can, or ask them to see if they have any cutworm collars. It prevents the bugs or prevents the worm from like attaching right at the stem. It can save the life of your peppers. So aphids, as with most plants, aphids are always going to be a pest. Aphids are a big vector for viruses, unfortunately, and they can cause mature plants to develop more crinkled leaves. Blossom end rot, similar to tomatoes, calcium deficiency. Also similar to tomatoes, like a fungal infection is going to be causing yellow or dark spots on the leaves and generally leads to plant rot. Fungus is pretty synonymous with rot. And my ethos is that it's always easier to try and prevent disease and try and cure it, especially with plants. Can't really talk to a plant to see what's wrong. You kind of have to take a guess or refer to all the gardening books that you got. All right. So cucumbers. Oh, my mouse is working now. Let me, there we go. All right. Oh, that's not what I wanted. All right, so cucumbers. So these guys belong in the same family as melons and squash. Similar to tomatoes, there's two main types of cucumbers. You got a vining variety and also bush varieties. And the vining varieties, you're going to have stakes or supports or some sort of trellising. And homegrown cucumbers are always going to be tastier and more crunchier than the store-bought varieties. So by all means, if you can grow some cucumbers this summer, do your best. All right, so planting cucumbers. So like many other plants, you can start them from starter plants, or you can direct sow into your garden or a container, whatever works. So generally plant the seeds, if you're direct sowing, about an inch deep in the soil, or you can even kind of create mounds like along your garden rows. And there I recommend you plant at least in groups of 3. And then once the seedlings start to emerge, you can thin out the seedlings so you only have 1 plant per mound. And for vining varieties, you want to give them a little bit more space, about a foot apart, just so they have ample room to stretch out. And yeah, for the bush variety, just because it will grow a little wider, about 3 feet apart is ideal. And like I always recommend mulching with cucumbers as well, just to conserve moisture and really keep pests from digging down at the root or the stem. So let's go over some care. So cucumbers, 6 hours of sunlight a day, or at least, as what I say, like probably about 6 to 10, if possible. So consistent and regular watering is pretty important for best quality fruit. Like you want to keep the soil moist, and this is a lot easier achieved, especially if you mulch. Cucumbers love long, hot days. And they grow just fine in both humid and dry conditions, just so long as you keep them well watered. As per usual, apply some nurture growth at planting, fertilize every 2 weeks or fertilize every 2 weeks up until flowers emerge. And then give it a break just for natural pollination. And then kind of once you start to see fruit forming again, you start applying every 2 weeks. And cucumbers, it's good to set up, or you're going to need to set up a trellis system for the vining varieties, especially if you have limited ground area. All right, so common problems and pests with cucumbers. So seedlings are often attacked by squash bugs. So you're gonna want to keep an eye on the underside of the leaves and flick off, whatever you got to do to get the eggs off, get them off. Powdery mildew is a pretty common one that you're going to find with cucumbers, especially because there's generally so much moisture around a cucumber. Though our fertilizer is not a pesticide, applying a little bit of nurture growth at planting especially, and continuing the sprays, that actually the microbes in our fertilizer will help outcompete powdery mildew. Let's talk about that later though. So cucumber beetles, they'll also feed on the cucumber, like the vine part of the cucumber, as well as the leaves and the fruits, and they leave dark marks on the plant. They can spread disease like bacterial wilt. Or you can use sticky traps, to try and catch them or trap them. Or even with cucumbers, row covers aren't a bad idea. Just like a gentle netting that you can apply on top of your garden rows. All right, moving right along. Zucchini, or zucchini, as my landscaper friends used to say, zucchini. So it's a type of summer squash. It's a member of the pumpkin family. And zucchini comes in all sorts of shapes, colors, and flavors, pretty similar to all the other vegetables that we're talking about today. And also one fun fact that I learned about zucchini is that one regular size zucchini only has 25 calories if you eat the whole thing. Nuts. Like in comparison, a baking potato has about 120 to 130 calories. All right. So planting zucchini. So you want to plant, if you're direct sowing, you want to plant seeds about 1 inch deep in the soil, about 2 feet apart. Alternatively, which is similar to the cucumbers, you can also plant them in mounds. Pardon me. You can plant them in mounds that are about 3 to 5 feet apart. Oh, typo there. My apologies. And also similar to cucumbers, once the seedlings start emerging on the mounds, thin them out so there's only one plant per mound. So if we're having a long winter or spring isn't coming quick enough, you can always start your seeds indoors about 2 to 3 weeks before the last frost date. And again, once you find out your hardiness zone, you can just Google when the last frost date is. I think we're past ours now in Southern Ontario. On Victoria Day weekend, it's a gardening weekend in Ontario, right? So you want to, as per usual, give your soil a little drench with nurture growth before you plant. Like zucchinis are heavy feeders, and they're going to need as much help as they can to establish a good root zone just so they can get more nutrients from the soil. All right, so care and harvest for zucchini. So they need zucchini likes sun, but they're not as big of a fan of wind. So if you can shelter them somehow from the wind, by all means do so. Watering, you're going to want consistent and regular watering, just to maintain better quality fruit. Generally, I'd say the soil should be moist, like 4 inches to the ground. So be a bit more than probably someone's finger. So zucchini prefer like pretty mild temperatures, like middle of the way. Like I'd say about, like, if you can hover around 15 degrees, or if they could choose a temperature, they'd want to hover around 15 degrees. And as with all the other plants we've mentioned, you want to fertilize with nurture growth about every 2 weeks, and as well at planting. So what are some common problems that we see here? So these are kind of similar problems to cucumbers. Like you'll see squash bugs attacking zucchini. It's pretty common. If you see eggs on the underside of your leaf, pardon me, go ahead, pick them off, flick them off, do whatever you got to do to get them off there. Powdery mildew is pretty common. as well with zucchini. Similar to tomatoes and peppers, you got blossom end rot, which is caused by a calcium deficiency. Again, that can occur because of fluctuations in moisture. And also squash vine borers. They feed on the plant stems actually, and they cause rot and can cause the plant to wilt. And same with some of the other vegetables. Row covers are phenomenal. All right, I think we're on our last vegetable here, gang. Still got you on the hook for 25 minutes, but we won't take that long. All right, so lettuce, it's a home gardener's must-have plant with quick growth cycles. I'm catching so many typos today, it's frustrating. So lettuce is available in plenty of varieties. And similar to kale, it continues to grow. Like you don't have to harvest the whole thing, though you can if you want to. You can just take little bits as you go. And lettuce, you can grow it indoors, grow it outdoors, you name it. So planting. So lettuce actually, if you're direct sowing, if you soak the seeds for about 16 hours to a day in a well-lit area before planting, it almost always increases germination rate with your lettuce. And also, if you're soaking it in cool water for that long, dilute a little bit of nurture growth into there and let the microbes really colonize the seed. Just so as the lettuce gets planted, it really helps the root grow or the root zone develop much faster than without the addition of microbes. So you want to, or generally, I'll try and sow lettuce seeds into a germination tray or a propagation tray just with some little plugs just to get the lettuce started. And you want to keep that tray pretty moist and ensure that the soil never dries out. And once you notice the roots of the lettuce are starting to branch out or they're a little more developed, that's when you can start to transplant them into the garden. Easy way to space them out is just bring a ruler with you, like about the size of a ruler, 25 centimeters to 30 centimeters, 25 if you're picky, 30 if you're easy, and keep them, about a ruler's length apart from each other in rows. And also, like, say you bought like live root lettuce from the grocery store. I know I did before. I thought it looked cool. Don't do it anymore. You can keep that in water a few days just to encourage growth, and you can replant it. All right, so care. So partially sunny is ideal for lettuce that you want to direct sow in the summer. Just depending on your variety, you might want to double check the sun requirements or the light requirements. Lettuce, the more water you give them, generally they'll have sweeter tasting leaves. Obviously, don't drown the plant, but they do need lots of water to stay crisp, cool, and produce sweet tasting leaves. Lettuce is also going to prefer cooler temperatures. They don't want it too hot or too cold. I'd say in between 10 to 20 degrees. 10 to 20 degrees Celsius is ideal. But honestly, lettuce is going to germinate as when the soil temperature is as low as 4 degrees, but it will not germinate in soil that's above 26 degrees Celsius. Also, that's it. Like, it won't germinate as low as 40 degrees Fahrenheit or 80 degrees Fahrenheit for the non-Celsius folks. Same as usual, you want to apply nurture growth right at planting in about every 2 to 3 weeks after the fact. So what are some common problems and pests that you're going to find with lettuce? So especially when you grow lettuce in outdoor beds, aphids are pretty common. Cutworms, which attack the stem or like around the base of the lettuce. Slugs love lettuce. Snails love lettuce. Whiteflies are pretty common, and even rabbits. Like, I know in my neighborhood, I see about 4 rabbits a day when I'm out walking. I also see a pretty eager fox every night, who I imagine is looking for all those rabbits. So bolting is another pretty common problem in lettuce, and it's caused by like warm temperatures almost like too soon in the season, and it leads to plants producing like a large central stem, and it really takes away from the flavor and like the marketability of your lettuce. Companion planting is pretty common. Like marigolds are a great companion plant for lettuce just because they attract a lot of the pests. Even basil is pretty good for it too. Thyme, great companion plants with lettuce. and row covers also with lettuce. That'll help keep some of the pests from actually being able to settle on your lettuce. And it can also help keep the rabbits away too. All right, so that's about the end of the veggies that we're going to talk about. And I just got a little bit to talk about nurture growth. So here's our fertilizer here. So essentially what we're trying to do is make fertilizing as simple, safe, and sustainable as it can be, especially for home gardeners like yourself. So our stuff is simple in the fact that you just got to mix it with water in like a squirt bottle, shake it, spray it. It's safe because we're 100% certified organic by 3 different companies. We have absolutely no chemicals in our fertilizer at all. So you can use it around the kids or pets without worrying about them getting chemicals on their skin or worrying about what kind of products that you're putting on their food. And it's sustainable in the sense that, which is also kind of what separates us from every other fertilizer company, is that we make our fertilizer out of recycled food waste that we collect from food service businesses here in Mississauga. Well, technically I'm in Burlington, but the office is in Mississauga. So we're also, I put a little asterisk besides naturally repels insects because, for the record, like we're not a pesticide and we make absolutely no claims to be. However, enough of our growers have reported a lack of pests or fungus after they started using nurture growth, that I'd feel remiss if I didn't include that point. But by all means, that's a very secondary kind of accidental bonus. It's definitely not what we intended, and it's not what we market our product as. It's a fertilizer. All right, so we're a circular economy project. So first off, we rescue food waste. And then we turn that food waste into an organic fertilizer. And mind you, it's not a compost tea. I get that question a lot. Like compost tea, you're taking compost and steeping it in a liquid, removing the compost, and then you're just left with a nutrient-rich liquid. With our fertilizer, we actually render down the food waste, and then add our proprietary blend of microbes, which continue to eat the food waste and help get us to the colony forming unit numbers that we need. And then from there, use nurture growth to grow some happier plants, help people grow a little bit safer, and just try and reduce the amount of chemicals that we're using in general. Not that we're on a crusade against chemicals, but there's easy ways to grow food in a healthy way. All right. Yeah, so horticulture, agriculture, recreation, that's kind of our blend of specialties. And we do have a proprietary blend of microorganisms. It's patent pending, so I can't really release that to you. But by all means, if you're curious about it, give me an email at the end of the presentation, and let's talk about it. I'll try and be as coy as I can. And just so you guys can kind of get a look at what nurture growth can do. So on the left side of both photos is the nurture growth treated bok choy. And on the right-hand side of both photos is the control bok choy. So you can see how much darker the soil is. Like it's like clear as day how much darker the soil is. On the nurture growth patch, you can see that the root hairs are much longer. The roots are a little whiter. There's more root hairs. And there's also about a 50% yield increase on this bok choy patch. More offshoots and more uniform growth in the vegetables. And with that being said, boom. Let's have a chat. So I'm gonna close out of this just so I can see everyone here. Let me open up the chat really quick, just so I can see what you guys are saying. So before we get too into the question and answer period, I just want to thank you all so very much for coming out tonight and hanging out with me, listening to me talking about gardening. So by all means, if you guys have any questions, feel free to leave them in the chat, and I'll do my best to get back to them. If you don't want to leave them in the chat, you can also send me an email here. You know what? I'll put my email in the chat just so you can copy and paste it. richgrowthbio.com. So by all means, you can copy and paste that. Send me an email. Let me know how good I did. Let me know how bad I did. Any feedback is appreciated.